Hello everyone, my name is Steve Bishop from ProgrammingMadeEasy.com, and today we're going to be talking about intention-driven communication, or inverting your communication control. Now you may be asking, who is this video intended for? And the answer is, well, everybody. If you're just looking for a way to improve your communication with friends, family, peers, and coworkers, you certainly can watch this video and pick up a particular practice that we're going to talk about a little bit later on that could really help you with your communication. But this video is primarily intended for organizations looking to improve their communication between teams and management. But really anybody can watch this. So without further ado, let's move on with the presentation. So before we begin with the specifics, I do need to go over some basic concepts. We're going to talk about values, principles, and practices, and more specifically, how values, principles, and practices are connected. Now, this primarily comes from the book Extreme Programming Explained by Kent Beck. Let's start off with our values. So what are values? Well, values are beliefs that motivate people and organizations to act one way or another. So they're the belief system that either an organization or a person tries to use to guide them throughout their endeavors. Then we have principles. And you might think that principles and values are interchangeable, and quite often we do use these two words interchangeably. But there is a little bit of a difference. Principles are rules or standards that are specific to domains. And we're trying to be a little bit more narrow about those rules or standards. We're not applying it across the entire organization or across entire teams or anything like that, or ways that we behave in general. We actually start looking at specific areas of our lives or specific domains of the business and try to set forward some rules or standards for how we conduct ourselves in those specific domains. So it just kind of narrows the focus a little bit from the values. And then finally, we have practices. And practices are those activities that are done regularly that embody a principle. So these are the concrete implementations, if you will, of the principles. There are specific activities that we do that should embody those principles. So one other thing to note here with practices is that they are really a requirement for any organization that wants to start to apply any new sets of values or principles. Without those practices, teams are going to struggle to figure out how to apply those new values and principles. So make sure that you are talking about practices as well with any conversation regarding values and principles. Now you'll notice that as we go from left to right on this chart, we get from a more general perspective where our beliefs are kind of these overarching general concepts that we try to adhere to. And we get smaller and smaller until we get to more specific or more specificity when we're talking about practices. These are the actual things that we can do, and they're very specific ways to do them. Software systems require good communication in order to function properly. So let's examine a value, principle, and practice of building software systems. Then see how it relates to communication. So first, let's talk about a value. If we're talking about software systems, the objective is really kind of the value. The thing that provides value to any user of the system are the objectives, right? The things that the events a system aims to perform. Then we have a principle of inversion of control. Now, inversion of control is basically the idea that low-level systems control the flow of the program up to the high-level systems. So just for example, consider a RESTful API using some sort of MVC style framework, right? Where we have, maybe we don't have the views, but we have models and controllers, right? When we're talking about a controller, it is essentially handling that request and determining where to go with it from then. It tries to determine what kind of relevant data to pass along to the services and the business rules. So a lot of that control is kind of handled by the controller. And the services and the business rules do not need to know anything really related to the format of the request. Okay, so with that in mind, inversion of control as a principle of good software design, then what is a practice that we do to implement inversion of control? Well, one of the practices we do is something called event-driven, where the flow of the program is determined by events. Event-driven is quite often thought about when talking about communicating between microservices, but this idea of event-driven can be applied at the class level. We'll talk about that here in just a second, but well, I guess just think of it like this. Instead of one function calling another function, instead a class will raise an event either before or after work is performed by that class. So the lower level systems, the lower level classes, when they do some sort of work, they could raise an event, and then the higher level systems are listening to those events. So rather than having the higher level systems telling the lower level systems what to do, it's the opposite direction, right? That's that inversion of control. The lower level systems are raising events, and if the higher level systems want to listen into those events, then they can. They just need to subscribe to them. Okay, so these are all things that I think if you have any sort of extended amount of time working with software, you've probably heard of these terms: inversion of control, event-driven design, and you kind of understand that objectives are essentially the value that the system provides. But what we're going to do now is we're going to introduce a concept some of you may or may not have heard of, but it's really going to flip this around in a way you've probably never thought of before. And that is the concept of Conway's Law. So for those of you who are not familiar with it, it's paraphrased in this slide as organizations design systems which mirror their own communication structure. This is the Wikipedia summarization of it, and I really like it. I think it really kind of gets to the core of what Conway was trying to say, is that organizations design systems which mirror their own communication structure. So think about that for just a moment. There's a mirroring effect between the systems that are being built by the development team and the communication structure of the development teams. And when you start to think about that, that leads us to some interesting parallels that we can draw between how our organization communicates and the systems that it designs. Now, the other thing I want to talk about here is that if these values, principles, and practices are good for the system, then they should also be good for our communication structures. So we should be able to swap the software system-based words with communication structure-based words to come up with a value, principle, and practice for good communication. So the words that we're going to try to transpose here or swap around are these: program with communication, system with team, and events with intentions. So we replace the words we use when talking about building a program with their equivalent counterparts when talking about building communication. And as we replace the words, the definition should continue to make sense. That is how we know we are on the right track. So as we swap these words around, the definitions of objective, inversion, control, and event-driven, those should all sound correct as we swap the words out. And that is how we know we're on the right track. So let's go ahead and start with objectives. Well, actually, let's start off with the title of this. And we're going to swap it from system values, principles, and practices to team values, principles, and practices. So if we swap around events and system with intentions in team, we get this. The objectives are the intentions a team aims to perform. And I think that that definitely makes sense, right? The intentions a team aims to perform. Those are the objectives. So once again, if the definition sounds right when we swap out these words, we're probably on the right track. Let's do this for the next one, inversion of control. And now our definition of inversion of control looks like this. Low-level teams control the flow of the communication up to the high-level teams. Now that's interesting. Think about that for just a moment. Is this the principle your company uses to communicate? Or is it a command and control from top down? Is it maybe the reverse of this? And I think for the large majority of you out there, It's probably the latter, right? Most of you are probably in organizations where it's very command and control, where the high-level teams are controlling the flow of communication down to the low-level teams. But if inversion of control is a good system principle, then it should also be a good communication principle. Now, with that in mind, I think we probably want to know, since we talked about this before, that these are great values and principles, but what can we do in terms of a practice that gets us this inversion of control? Well, that's where we're going to change event-driven to something called intention-driven. So intention-driven says that the flow of the communication is determined by intentions. So intentions become the device for passing information between the layers of people, just as events were the device that was used for passing information between the different layers of our application, between the systems. The flow of communication is determined by intentions. So the intentions become the device for passing information. Okay, and just to kind of round off this slide, if we went ahead and took Conway's law and swap out the words with their counterparts, we get organizations design teams which mirror their own program structure. And yeah, we know, once again, we know that our word replacements are correct because the Conway's law definition is still accurate. And I would even argue perhaps it's even more so. I think that as organizations, especially more mature organizations with perhaps legacy systems, as they're growing or as they're trying to assign teams or design their team structures, quite often it's in order to mirror the program structure because the program already has existed for a long period of time, and now they need to organize their teams to manage the program. Okay, so we know that a practice is required. We have to have some sort of practice in order to implement a value or principle. And when we're talking about improving our communications as an organization, or even on the individual level, we need to make sure that we are talking about some sort of practice we can do to improve those communications. So, what does this intention-driven communication look like? Well, let's take the definition we had before of intention-driven. The flow of communication is determined by intentions. And again, it's a form of inversion of control. So intentions of the low-level team is stated to the high-level team. Now, the high-level teams respond to the intentions of the low-level teams and provide some control. So in this context, the control we're talking about with high-level teams is not about communication. It's about helping the low-level team understand what to do next. So as the low-level team says what their intention is, the high-level team kind of sets up some guardrails or says, you know what, go ahead and do that or don't do that based upon some sort of business concerns. But it's not about communication control. It's just about the overall direction of the program. And again, I want to link this back to the concept of event-driven, right? Where we're the opposite of intention-driven, like the system version of intention-driven, where events are being raised by the low level and the high levels simply respond to those events. Okay, so that's the same thing here. High-level teams respond to the intentions of the low-level teams, and they provide some sort of organizational control. Now, one of the things that's really, really critical in order to make this work is that I should say, one of the good ways of thinking about how you should package the information from a low-level team to a high-level team in terms of intention is that the main purpose or the goal or outcome of what the low-level team is intending to do, that's really kind of the focus of the communication. What is the goal? It needs to be included, right? It should be the focus of the communication. The focus of the intention that's being stated is around this idea of a goal or an outcome that the low-level team hopes to do. Then it's also important that any relevant information that belongs to that goal or outcome or that belongs to this intention should be passed along within the intention statement, right? So all the relevant information that the higher level team might need should also be wrapped up in this intentional statement, right? Of what the low level team is intending to do. And again, if we were to map this onto building event-driven systems, whenever you're raising an event, you don't just simply raise it. You also pass along basically a package of information, some information to the subscriber, to the higher level system, letting them know maybe some more contextual information about the event that's being raised. And that's the same thing here. Relevant information about this intention needs to be passed along as part of the intention statement. Now, let's give an actual example. Well, from the low-level team, it would look like this, essentially a statement to the high-level team of something like, I intend to deploy the commit containing the sales order invoice changes related to ticket 45932. So notice that we're starting off with this vocabulary of I intend to, right? This language of I intend to. That's a really helpful format to make sure that you are focusing what it is that's being said around the actual outcome or goal, right? The goal of this statement is to deploy the commit. And then remember, we wanted to have all relevant information to be passed along with the intention statement. It's kind of this package of information that goes along with the goal or the outcome, right? I intend to deploy the commit is the stated goal. The relevant information is it's the commit that contains sales order invoice changes for this ticket 45932. So that if the higher level team needed to know where to look or where to go or what this particular commit entails, then they could go look that information up, or they could ask for more information about it at this point, and there would be some context sharing between the two teams. Now, for the high-level team, the response is just simply something like, very well, or please wait until Sam is done with their commit. And this is kind of that control piece that I was talking about, where the higher-level team has some ability then to kind of focus on the more organizational goals and look for the conflicts that might be there. So maybe we say, hold on before you do your commit. Let's wait until Sam is done with their commit, right? Make sure we don't have some sort of conflict going on there. But typically, the goal should be that we get to this idea of the high-level systems, the higher-level teams, the managers, the product owners, the product managers, the software engineers or architects, whoever it is that these low-level teams are stating their intentions to. Really, you want them to just basically say, okay, very well, good job, thanks. And we want those kind of terse responses. We want less context, less commands to be handed down from the high levels. We just want them to basically be informed and then give us their blessing, or perhaps provide some sort of course correction based upon some new information that the high-level team has, or some change of goals that the low-level team hasn't been informed of yet. Those sorts of things that could happen while the low-level team is doing their work. Okay, so that is an example, and I just want you, I'm trying to leave this up for a long period of time. Again, low-level teams say, I intend to do something. And even those high-level teams, as they're reporting up the chain, they can use the same I intend to statement. So as you are communicating upwards, up the chain, you use this intend to. And whenever you're communicating down the chain, it's pretty much an either yes, go ahead, or no, don't go. And maybe here's the reason why, or, here's this new set of goals that we want you to try to accomplish, that sort of thing. All right, so let's wrap this talk up with some conclusions. So first, as we talked about, values and principles are difficult to implement without the practices that support them, right? We can't just be telling teams about the values and principles. We have to also be giving them some stated practices that they should be, they should either try, or you kind of want to avoid forcing them to do them. You instead just want to imply or give them the opportunity to try those practices out to see if they work for the teams. But those practices need to fall in line with the values and principles. We need to invert the communication flow from low-level teams to high-level teams, right? So the inversion of control, the same concept of inversion of control in our software systems, we can take that same exact philosophy, that same exact principle, and say that we need to invert the communication flow from low-level teams to high-level teams. Then we want to use intention-driven communication to communicate intention rather than commands. So the low-level teams are stating their intentions with something like "I intend to," and the high-level teams are providing some sort of mechanism of control saying, "Very well, go ahead and do that," or "Hold on before you do that. Here's some additional goals or some additional concerns that you need to know about before we can proceed." The thing we really need to try to avoid here is to have those high-level teams issuing commands to the low-level teams. Instead, we need transparent goals that are passed along from high level to low level, and then let the low level teams figure out how to achieve those goals, and then instruct the high level teams about what the intentions are of the low level teams and how they plan on achieving those goals. And of course, cat pictures are a requirement of any good presentation. That is a picture of my late cat Cisco. He was an adorable little kitty. He's looking at our little electronic fireplace that we had in our apartment. But of course, once again, no, in order for any good presentation to exist, you need to have cat pictures. So there's one of my little kitty. If you're looking to reach out to me, if you want, again, my name is Steve Bishop. I'm a lead enterprise instructor and principal software developer for a company called Galvanize. And again, this channel is Programming Made Easy. This is kind of my own independent work that I like to do these presentations about things that I'm thinking about. And if you'd like to reach out to me about this concept of intention-driven communication, feel free to reach out to me on Facebook at Programming Made EZ, that's just the letters E and the letter Z, or E and Z if you're Canadian. And then there's Twitter. If you want to reach out to me on Twitter, it's just Easy Programming. Once again, the letter E, the letter Z. And then on LinkedIn, you can also, it's fairly new page, but it is also Programming Made EZ on LinkedIn, and I check that page out now. So thank you so much for watching. I hope that you learned something. If you did, please don't forget to like, favorite, and of course, subscribe to my channel. And if you have any additional comments, please feel free to drop those comments in the comment section below. And if you've got good questions or good comments, I certainly will respond to them. Thank you so much for watching, and I hope you have a wonderful rest of your day. Bye-bye. I'd like to thank the following members for your contributions to this channel. Without those contributions, none of this would be possible. Thank you.